Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Wednesday, July 15th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square Washington state government reporter. And in today's episode, brand new poll results on how Washingtonians feel about the income tax, Governor Bob Ferguson's favorability, and how Washingtonians feel about the direction of the state overall. And then Governor Ferguson wants to require the FAFSA, that's the Federal Student Aid Loan Program. He wants to require every Washington senior, graduating senior, to fill out the FAFSA as a graduation requirement. There would be an opt out mechanism for that. But we wanted to dive a little deeper into maybe some of the motivation for that. And we have some reaction from Washington Policy Center's Education Center Director Vicki Murray to that. And then finally, my colleague Tim Clauser on the city of Spokane and utility rates potentially going up come 2027. There are some proposed commercial sewer rate restructuring mechanisms in place that could lead to a dramatic increase in those rates for some businesses, especially in Spokane. So that's all coming up in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Now, a new poll obtained by the Center Square shows Washington voters are opposed to the state's new income tax by a 3-1 margin, with 57% then saying they believe they're all going to have to eventually pay that income tax, regardless of how much money they earn, even though at this point it is initially just a millionaire's tax, a tax of 9.9% on income above $1 million. Now, the survey was conducted by a group called Signal on behalf of Concerned Taxpayers Accountability Center, CTAC. So they surveyed 800 likely general election voters between May 13th and 15th. So this poll is a couple of months old. In addition to questions about the new income tax, as I mentioned, these respondents were asked about how they feel about Governor Ferguson. Are you happy with the job he's doing? And then how do you feel about the direction of the state? So on income tax opinions, it was 67% opposed and 21% in favor. And of those opposed, 60% said they are strongly opposed. About 6% in the poll were undecided. Another 6% said they neither supported nor opposed the income tax, really just had no opinion on it. Then respondents were asked about messaging on both sides of the income tax debate. I found this pretty interesting. Messaging from supporters of the tax, of course, says it's only going to affect people that make $1 million or more, and it's going to fund all these important programs, education programs, and healthcare and transportation. Messaging from opponents of the income tax, of course, say they believe is eventually going to be a tax on all levels of income earned. And they also argue it is unconstitutional. So respondents sided with the opposition statement by a margin of 57% to 30%. So I found that pretty interesting. They found broader agreement with the argument that they believe it's unconstitutional and that eventually everybody is going to pay the tax. Now, another one of the questions is Washington on the right track? Poll participants were asked about the direction of the state and if they believe things are headed down the right track. And 54%, you see, said our state is on the wrong track compared to 37% who believe we're headed in the right direction. And 39% actually said we're definitely on the wrong track versus just 3% said definitely right track. So some pretty strong opinions about the direction of the state. And then again, the poll findings when it comes to Governor Bob Ferguson and his favorability, 49% held an unfavorable view of the governor, 39% viewed him favorably. And among those who hold the unfavorable view of the governor, 37.4% held a very unfavorable view. Those with a favorable view, just 11.6% said very favorable. So the poll results come, of course, as Washington voters are very likely to consider the income tax on the fall ballot. We're waiting any day now for the office of Steve Hobbs, our Secretary of State, to officially certify the initiative that would repeal the income tax should voters decide to vote yes. That's Initiative 645. They turned in more than 500,000 signatures for folks saying we want this repeal to be on the ballot. They only need 309,000 valid voter signatures. So even if about 200,000 get tossed out, it is very likely this will, in fact, appear on the November ballot. And then we have a legal challenge underway by Citizen Action Defense Fund. That lawsuit contends the tax is unconstitutional because our state constitution says that our income is our property and it must be treated uniformly and capped at 1% as property. So they believe it's unconstitutional. Um, Meantime, we had supporters of the income tax launching on Tuesday of this week their formal campaign to push against the repeal attempt. And at that event on Wednesday, which was held at Food Lifeline in Seattle, you had Food Lifeline CEO Stephen Davis coming up and talking about why he believes the income tax is necessary to, among other things, ensure food programs aren't cut.
By fully funding breakfast and lunch for every K-12 student in Washington, we can ensure that every child has access to nutritious food throughout the school day. The research shows that when there's a universal school meals in place, not only does student learning improve and academic success, but also it reduces a household's food insecurity rate by nearly 20% by those families most at risk. From Food Lifeline's perspective, and our partner network of more than 300 organizations that serve their local communities, the stakes of this initiative could not be any higher. Today, 1 in 8 individuals that live in Washington is food insecure, and 1 in 6 children. We believe Initiative 645 would jeopardize the critical investments that help address these challenges and would make it harder for too many of our neighbors to put food on the table. That's why Food Lifeline is proud to stand with so many partners across Washington in support of the No on 645 campaign.
Let's Go Washington provided a statement this morning based on the poll results. And the statement said, in part, Bob Ferguson has ignored Washingtonians' opposition to the income tax since the day he signed it. Today's poll confirms nothing has changed. Voters still don't want it. Yesterday, they say Ferguson and his allies spent 45 minutes spreading lies about the repeal. The truth is that voting yes preserves funding for the working families tax credit, paid family leave, sales tax reductions, and small business relief. Again, that was from Let's Go Washington in a response to the Center Square sent via text after those poll results came out. And Washington GOP Chairman Jim Walsh also texted a statement in response to the poll saying the Ferguson-Peterson state income tax scheme is wildly unpopular. If anything, this poll may understate how unpopular the scheme really is. All right, moving on to our next segment in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. High school seniors in our state may soon have to fill out the federal student loan or the federal application for federal aid, the FAFSA, in order to graduate. Governor Ferguson this week came out with held a press conference at Highline College in Des Moines and said he's going to ask the state legislature to make this a graduation requirement. We have a handful of school districts that already have this as part of their curriculum, but this would be all 295 public school districts in the state requiring students to fill out the FAFSA. So here is the governor at Monday's press conference at Highline College.
Washington State is literally the most generous state in the entire country for providing financial assistance, and by that I mean free money for young people to go to college or to get job training. The state legislature in past years has created a program that makes us the most generous in the entire country. So for example, if you're a family of 3, 2 parents and 1 child, or 1 parent and 2 children, and you make $70,000 or less a year, that young student can go to a college in Washington State for free. there is that level of assistance. If you make more money, you can get significant assistance to pay for that education or that job training. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. In order to access those funds, you've got to complete this form, the FAFSA form, or a state equivalent, the WAFSA. The bad news is Washington State has historically not just done poorly in completing that form, we've done terribly, okay? Last year we ranked 47th out of 50 states in having young people complete this form that can unlock so many dollars for them to pursue in education or job training. We put in significant resources this year to try to improve our standing. I signed an executive order to create a group that would come up with ideas on how we could do a better job to get the word out to young people about the importance of completing this form. We made improvements. We moved from 47th to 40th. We moved up 7 spots. That's great. That's thousands of more students who are unlocking that possibility, but let's be honest, 40th is not going to get the job done. The good news is that there is an alternative. More and more states are requiring young people to complete the FAFSA in order to graduate.
So, as you heard Governor Ferguson say there, students who don't want to fill it out could have an opt out option. It's not, yes, it's going to be required, but if you don't want to do it, if you say, I'm not going to college, or my parents make too much money, I'm going to college, but we know that we're not going to qualify for any federal or state aid, and so you don't want to fill it out, you can do that. And again, lawmakers are going to be pressed on this from legislation from the governor. Now, he said that around half of Washington families right now qualify for higher ed, according to the Student Achievement Council, but many of them are just simply either lacking the knowledge that they have this option and that the aid's available, or choosing not to. So they want to push this requirement. So what to make of that? What to make of, is there something else? Is there another motivation for why the governor would be wanting to push the FAFSA? So I reached out to Washington Policy Center's Education Center Director, Vicki Murray, to ask about that and her thoughts on the push.
I think it's fine to make sure that students are aware that either federal or state resources exist, and most children and most students can opt out if they choose not to. There's nothing that's preventing school districts from making this available now, offering it as part of their math classes or counseling. So to me, this is fine. I think where our focus really needs to be is on our students, high school students and soon to be graduates, prepared for college level work. And all available evidence suggests that our high school students are not. Let's just consider the results. Let's look at first 10th graders. In ELA, just 60% of 10th graders are on track for college level work. It drops down to 31% in math. And then if you look at 11th grade science, we're only talking about 37%. So while I think it's important to let students know about financing options, it's far more important that we make sure our students are prepared for college level work. And I think that's where our focus needs to be.
Now, there were some posts on social media this week that I noticed from some suggesting that they don't trust the governor's intentions for pushing the FAFSA as a graduation requirement. Some were suggesting that maybe they just are looking to obtain and document financial income tax data for eventually if the income tax is pushed to a lower threshold in the state of Washington. So I asked Murray directly about that, and she said she doesn't really think that's the case, at least not at this point, but she suggested it is something to pay attention to when Governor Ferguson offers that legislation to lawmakers.
My understanding is as of this point, it can't be shared with anybody outside of student, applicants' chosen colleges and also the Washington Achievement Council. Now, I think what perhaps we should pay attention to when the governor does submit his proposed legislation let's look for that to see if there are changes with student privacy, data privacy, and how very sensitive that would be considered. Very sensitive, personally identifiable information like that can be shared. So I would say at this point, I haven't seen anything, but let's keep an eye out.
I also reached out to the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Rakedahl, to see if they too support the push for requiring the FAFSA as a graduation requirement. And I received back this from OSPI saying, we're supportive of efforts to require students to complete the FAFSA or the WASFA, that's the Washington State equivalent, or affirmatively opt out as part of their graduation requirements. They noted that last week, Rakedahl announced his proposal for a post-secondary launch course. It would be a required course for all graduating seniors to prepare students for their next step and beyond. And now back to a minute for the low test scores that Vicki Murray at WPC was noting. She said, let's not talk so much about a push for the FAFSA or ban on cell phones and everything. Sure, those things might all be great things to push for, but let's not use that as a deflection from what the real issue is. And that's pretty dismal test scores in the state of Washington. A lot happened during the pandemic, and test scores pretty much across the country went down for most, if not all, grade levels. But some states have quickly recovered. Washington State has been very slow to recover, and in some areas we haven't at all. And the new kids count data just came out. I want to highlight a couple of the notes from that. The 2026 Kids Count Data Book ranked Washington 17th in overall child well-being, 31st in education, and that's a 4-spot decline from last year. And data from 2024 reveals that 70% of Washington's 8th graders are not proficient in math. 68% of 4th graders are not proficient in reading. So a little bit disappointing with the test scores are going. And again, as Vicki Murray noted, she would like to see more attention paid to ways to improve those outcomes for students. Sure, we can push college at the same time. We can, maybe take cell phones away as a distraction in classrooms universally across the state. But until and unless we improve these outcomes for students, we're really not doing them any real favors. All right, finally, for today's episode, the city of Spokane utility rates. Boy, there could be some real concerns there with officials preparing new utility rate ordinances for next year, 2027, and the following year for 2028. And one of the sticking points that came up during this week's city council meeting was a proposed commercial sewer rate restructuring that could lead to very steep increases for some businesses.
Everybody, regardless of the size of their meter, is currently paying $39.79. Is that correct?
Correct.
So somebody who, let's just say, has a 4-inch meter, they're going to see a jump from basically $40 to $210.
Correct. Correct.
It's a pretty sizable
It
jump.
is a sizable jump, but when we looked at the cost of service analysis, that's how much they were underpaying for their service.
And I understand that, but even when we did the GFCs, we at least tried to phase in to a certain extent over 2 years, right? I mean, can we not phase this in a little bit more so it's not such a large leap? I hear it constantly, just this perception of the city being anti-business, and if we're raising rates pretty dramatically on some of those businesses, that could further that.
Yeah. And what our cost of service analysis though is telling us is that commercial has been underpaying for a really long time. And so that's what we're trying to make up for so that they pay their fair share. So I hear that, but I also feel like at some point we have to correct some of those differences in multifamily, and that's where we're seeing single family about where it should be, and the multifamily and the commercial need to be rebalanced.
But back to my phase-in comment earlier, I mean,
Yeah.
I think there is reasonable ways to get to perhaps that point where they're paying their quote fair share.
Sure.
Rather than a massive jump, because clearly it's on us that we charge so low, if that is indeed the case.
Yes.
And so to then just say, well, we're going to punish you tomorrow because we screwed up the last decade,
Yeah,
I don't think that's
and
correct.
we're going to take a look at that, and what you're going to find is that the smaller commercial customers are really not going to pay that much more than they are today.
Much more on this in an article posted on our Center Square Washington page, as put together from my colleague Tim Clauser, who covers Spokane in depth and really like no other reporter in the state, in my opinion, my humble opinion. Thank you for watching today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Again, check out our Center Square Washington page for more articles like we've discussed here today. And I hope you'll join us again on Thursday.